Because of this, I have found myself drawn for many years to the story of Peter getting out of the boat and walking on the water with Christ. Peter and his friends got into a little boat one afternoon to cross the Sea of Galilee. Jesus wanted to be alone, so they were boating without him. Peter didn't mind. He'd been on boats his whole life. He liked them. But this time a storm blew in. Not a minor squall either. The Gospel of Matthew says that the boat was tormented by the waves. It was so violent that the only thing the disciples could do was to keep the boat upright. They wished the sides were a little higher and the wood a little thicker. By 3 a.m., I would imagine the disciples weren't worried about making it to the other side. They just wanted to stay alive. Then one of the disciples noticed a shadow moving toward them on the water. As it got closer, it became apparent that it was the figure of a human being walking on the water. Take a moment to let that image sink in. The disciples were in distress, and the very person who was able to help them was approaching them. Only he wasn't in the boat, and the disciples didn't recognize him. Amazingly enough, being boatless didn't seem to slow Jesus down at all. But the disciples were convinced he was a ghost, so they were terrified and cried out in fear. In hindsight, we may wonder how they could have failed to know it was Jesus. Who else could it be? But Matthew wants us to know that sometimes it takes eyes of faith to recognize when Jesus is around. Often, in the middle of the storm, tormented by waves of disappointment and doubt, we are no better at recognizing his presence than they were. Jesus decided it was time the disciples got to know a little bit more about the guy who was piloting this thing. "It's like this, dudes," he reassured them. "You can trust me. You know my character and my competence. You can safely place your destiny in my hand. Take courage. It's me." They didn't fully grasp it yet, but God was visiting them in the water-walking flesh. 12 disciples sat in the boat, and we don't know how 11 of them responded to that voice, perhaps with confusion, wonder, disbelief, or a little bit of each. But one of them, Peter, was about to become a water walker. He recognized that God was present, even in the most unlikely place. He realized that this was an extraordinary opportunity for spiritual adventure and growth, so he got an idea. He decided to do something religious. Peter blurted out to the water walker, "If it is you, command me to come to you on the water." Why does Matthew include this detail? Why doesn't Peter just plunge into the water? I think it's for a very important reason. This is not just a story about risk-taking. It's primarily a story about obedience. This means I'll have to discern between an authentic call from God and what might simply be a foolish impulse on my part. Courage alone is not enough. It must be accompanied by wisdom and discernment. Matthew is not glorifying risk-taking for its own sake. Jesus is not looking for bungee-jumping, hang-gliding, day-trading, tornado-chasing Pinto drivers. Water walking is not something Peter does for recreational purposes. This is not a story about extreme sports. It's about extreme discipleship. This means that before Peter gets out of the boat, he had better make sure Jesus thinks it's a good idea. So he asked for clarity. "If it is you, command me." And in the darkness, I think Jesus smiled. Maybe he laughed. Because one person in the boat got it. Peter had some inkling of what it was that the Master is doing. Not only that, Peter had enough faith to believe that he too could share the adventure. He decided he wanted to be part of history's original water walk. "Command me," he said. Put yourself in Peter's place for a moment. You have a sudden insight into what Jesus is doing. The Lord is passing by. He's inviting you to go on the adventure of your life, but at the same time you're scared to death. What would you choose, the water or the boat? The boat is safe, secure, and comfortable. On the other hand, the water is rough, the waves are high, the wind is strong, there's a storm out there. And if you get out of the boat, whatever your boat might happen to be, there's a good chance you might sink. But if you don't get out of the boat, there's a guaranteed certainty you will never walk on the water. This is an immutable law of nature. If you want to walk on the water, you've got to get out of the boat. So Peter goes to the side of the boat. The other disciples are watching closely. They've seen Peter shoot off his mouth before a lot. They wonder how far he'll take this thing. He puts one foot over the side, carefully gripping the edge of the boat, then the other foot. He's holding on with grim determination and white knuckles, and then he does something religious. He lets go. He abandons himself utterly to the power of Jesus. And suddenly, for the first time in history, an ordinary human being is walking on the water. For a while, it's as if only Peter and Jesus are present on the water. Peter is beaming with delight. Jesus is thrilled with his student. Like master, like disciple. For a while, they play Simon Says on the water. Then it happens. Peter saw the wind. Reality sets in, and Peter asks himself, what was I thinking? He realized he was on the water in the middle of a storm with no boat beneath him, and he was terrified. Nothing has really changed, though. The storm should have come as no surprise. It's been there all along. What has really taken place is that Peter's focus has shifted from the Savior to the storm. We all know what it is to see the wind. You begin a new adventure full of hope. Then reality sets in. Setbacks, opposition, unexpected obstacles. You see the wind. It should be expected. The world's a pretty stormy place. But somehow trouble still has the power to catch us by surprise. Larry Loudon, a philosopher of science, has spent the last decade studying risk management. He writes of how we live in a society so fear-driven that we suffer from what he calls risk lock, a condition which, like gridlock, leaves us unable to do anything or go anywhere. He summarizes literature on risk management in 19 principles. The first principle is the simplest. Everything is risky. If you're looking for absolute safety, you chose the wrong species. There is danger in getting out of the boat, but there is danger in staying in it as well. If you live in the boat, whatever your boat happens to be, you will eventually die of boredom and stagnation. Everything is risky. Now we come to a part of the story you may not like very much. I don't care for it much myself. The choice to follow Jesus, the choice to grow, is the choice for the constant recurrence of fear. You've got to get out of the boat a little every day. Let me explain. Here's a deep truth about water walking. The fear will never go away. Why? Because every time I want to grow, it will involve going into new territory, taking on new challenges. The fear will never go away. So now you can give up trying to make it go away. Fear and growth go together like macaroni and cheese. It's a package deal. The decision to grow always involves a choice between risk and comfort. This means that to be a follower of Jesus, you must renounce comfort as the ultimate value of your life. And that's sobering news to most of us because we're into comfort. Theologian Karl Barth said that comfort is one of the great siren calls of our age. As we will see, both choices, risk and comfort, tend to grow into a habit. Each time you get out of the boat, you become a little more likely to get out the next time. It's not that the fear goes away, but that you get used to living with fear. You realize it does not have the power to destroy you. On the other hand, every time you resist that voice, every time you choose to stay in the boat rather than heed its call, the voice gets a little quieter in you, until at last you don't hear its call at all. So as a result of seeing the wind and giving in to fear, Peter began to sink into the water. Here the question is, did Peter fail? Before I offer an answer, let me make an observation about failure, because in this book we talk about it a lot. Failure is not an event. Rather, it's a judgment about an event. Failure is not something that happens to us or a label we attach to things. It is a way that we think about outcomes. Before Jonas Salk developed a vaccine for polio that finally worked, he tried 200 unsuccessful ones. Somebody asked him, how did it feel to fail 200 times? I never failed 200 times in my life, Salk replied. I was taught not to use the word failure. I just discovered 200 ways how not to vaccinate for polio. Jonas Salk made 200 unsuccessful attempts to create a polio vaccine. Was Jonas Salk a failure? I grew up in northern Illinois and have rooted for the Chicago Cubs my whole life. As of this writing, the Cubs have not been in the World Series for 54 years. In fact, they have not won the World Series for over 90 years. Are the Chicago Cubs a failure? Okay, bad example. Did Peter fail? Well, I suppose in a way he did. His faith was not strong enough. His doubts were stronger. He saw the wind. He took his eyes off where they should have been. He sank. He failed. But here's what I think. I think there were 11 bigger failures sitting in the boat. They failed quietly. They failed privately. Their failure went unnoticed, unobserved, uncriticized. Only Peter knew the shame of public failure. But only Peter knew two other things as well. Only Peter knew the glory of walking on the water. He alone knew what it was to attempt to do what he was not capable of doing on his own, and then feeling the euphoria of being empowered by God to actually do it. Once you walk on the water, you never forget it, not for the